The day hung heavy with a strange quiet, the kind that settles when the air is charged with the weight of something unspoken. My hands tightened on the steering wheel as we glided down the nearly empty highway, the muted hum of the car engine filling the space between us. Outside, the sun dipped low, bathing the landscape in warm hues, a stark contrast to the frost building inside the car. To anyone watching, we might have looked like the perfect couple on a weekend errand, but the silence between my wife and me was a wall I couldn't see past. It wasn't the first time we'd fought. What couple doesn't? But this one felt different. Sharp, lingering, like a blade still too close to the skin. "We'll regret it," she finally said, her voice breaking the quiet but carrying none of the warmth I used to know. "You will. Maybe not today, but soon. And when you do, don't say I didn't warn you." I didn't answer right away, keeping my eyes on the road as her words settled in the cabin. This argument had been circling us for weeks now, ever since I'd brought up the idea of the gifts. My father's dream car. My mother's scooter, an indulgence, maybe even impractical, but it felt right. 35 years of marriage was worth the gesture, wasn't it? I'd always believed that milestones deserved grandeur. "It's done," I said finally, my tone flat. "There's no use talking about it anymore." Beside me, she let out a soft, humorless laugh. "You mean there's no use because you've already decided? Like always?" A sharp reply was on my tongue, but I swallowed it. Instead, I focused on the car ahead, on the road unwinding before us like a thread I could follow to something simpler. But simplicity wasn't part of our lives anymore. Not lately. The truth was, I could feel her slipping away. Not in the obvious ways, not in the ways you can easily name and point to, but in the thousand little moments where her gaze turned distant or her laughter rang hollow. It scared me, how familiar the unfamiliarity had become. And yet, I'd pushed through, hoping this weekend, this celebration, might patch the invisible cracks forming between us. The gifts sat in the back, their presence as heavy as her unspoken words. I had been thrilled when I'd pulled the strings to make the purchase. The sheer logistics alone were enough to drive a man to drink, but the satisfaction of seeing the plan come together had carried me through. Now, though, doubt crept in like a shadow. Had I done this for them? For us? Or for myself? To prove something, to hold on to a fleeting sense of control? The car we'd bought for my father was a sleek vintage model, its polished red surface glinting in the evening light as I glanced in the rearview mirror. The scooter was strapped in alongside it, bright and compact, a stark contrast to the tension wrapping around us. She hadn't wanted to come today, but I'd insisted. Said it was important that we chose the gifts together. Now I wondered if I just wanted her to be here so I wouldn't have to face the silence alone. Her phone buzzed softly in her lap, pulling her attention away. She glanced at the screen, her lips pressing into a thin line. She didn't answer it. Instead, she slipped the phone back into her bag and turned her face toward the window. I thought about asking who it was, her sister, maybe, or one of her friends, but something in me held back. The answer, whatever it might have been, wouldn't change the chasm widening between us. "I just don't want to see you ruin something good," she said after a while, her voice quieter now. "You always push too hard. You give too much of yourself away, and then you expect." She cut herself off, shaking her head. "Never mind." "No, go ahead," I said, my tone sharper than I intended. "Let's have it out. Let's dissect every single thing I've done wrong, as if that's going to change anything." She turned to me then, her eyes dark with something unreadable. "Maybe it's not about what you've done wrong. Maybe it's about what you're trying to fix." The words hit harder than I expected, and for a moment, I said nothing. The weight of them settled over me, sinking deep into the places I'd tried to ignore. She turned back to the window, her reflection in the glass catching the dying light. The house was still miles away, but already I could picture the celebration in my mind. The laughter, the toasts, the faces that would light up at the sight of those gifts. My father's grin as he ran a hand over the hood of the car. My mother's laugh as she tested out the scooter in the driveway. These were the moments I was counting on, the moments I needed to remind myself that some things were still worth holding on to. But sitting there in the driver's seat, with her silence stretching long and thin beside me, I couldn't shake the feeling that something else was about to begin. Something I wasn't ready for. The tension in the car felt like a storm waiting to break. For a while, she just stared out of the window, her jaw tight, her fingers clenching and unclenching in her lap. I should have known it wouldn't hold. Silence like that only ever meant one thing. It was building, coiling tight until the dam gave way. And when it did, it was as sharp as glass cutting through the air. "I can't take it anymore," she yelled, her voice shattering the quiet so suddenly that I almost swerved. "What were you thinking, Brian? Spending all our savings? On this?" I gripped the steering wheel tighter, keeping my eyes fixed on the road. "Here we go," I muttered under my breath, but she wasn't about to let me off easy. "You didn't even tell me. You didn't discuss it, didn't ask, just went ahead and did it like I don't even exist in this equation. And for what? A $28,000 car? Are you out of your mind?" Her words came fast and hard, each one punctuated by a mix of anger and disbelief. "We could have spent $3,000 and still gotten something great. What are we supposed to live on now, huh? What's left?" I clenched my teeth, the heat rising in my chest. "It's not like I threw the money away. It's for them. For my parents, for their anniversary. 35 years, Amanda. That's not just some random occasion you toss a toaster at." Her laughter was bitter, sharp. "Oh, excuse me for not understanding your grand gesture. You mean the one you didn't even have the decency to talk to me about first? Because I knew you'd shoot it down?" I snapped, my voice rising to match hers. "You've been against this from the start. But you know what? It's not about you. It's about them. They deserve this. Not at the expense of us, Brian," she shot back, her voice cracking. "Do you even hear yourself? You spent every cent we had, and for what? A flashy gift to make yourself feel better? It's not about me," I yelled, gripping the wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. "This is about honoring them. Showing them we care. But of course, you wouldn't get that. You're too busy obsessing over what's in the bank." Her silence this time wasn't cold or distant. It was hot, simmering with fury. When she finally spoke again, her voice was low, trembling with barely contained anger. "You didn't think about us. You didn't think about me. You just went ahead and made a decision for both of us like my opinion didn't matter. And now we're broke, Brian. Broke. But sure, let's just pretend everything's fine as long as your dad has a shiny car." The rest of the drive home was a blur of shouting. Every mile stretched long under the weight of our words, each one harsher than the last. By the time we pulled into the driveway, my throat was raw, and my chest felt tight. I slammed the car door shut, the echo of it matching the pounding in my head. She didn't say another word as she stormed into the house, her heels clicking against the hardwood floor like the last notes of an unfinished symphony. I followed her as far as the hallway before she turned into the bedroom and slammed the door shut, the lock clicking into place with finality. "Amanda, come on," I called after her, but there was no answer. Just the heavy silence of the closed door. For a moment I stood there, my fists clenched at my sides, debating whether to keep pushing. But what was the point? Her mind was made up, and mine wasn't changing either. Instead, I turned and went back outside. The car sat in the driveway, its polished surface gleaming under the porch light. Looking at it, I felt the first pang of doubt creep in, small but insistent. Was she right? Had I gone too far? I shoved the thought away. This wasn't about her, or even me. This was about my parents, about the years they'd spent building something solid, something worth celebrating. I pulled the wrapping paper from the trunk of my car, along with the bows and ribbons I'd picked out earlier. Amanda could stew in her anger all night if she wanted to. I wasn't about to let her ruin this. As I worked, the rhythmic sound of tape being pulled and scissors slicing through paper filled the cool night air. I moved quickly, methodically, wrapping the car with a precision that felt almost therapeutic. The scooter came next, its compact frame easier to manage. Piece by piece, the gifts transformed into bright, colorful tokens of celebration. I paused only once, glancing back at the house. Her shadow passed behind the curtains of the bedroom window, but she didn't look out. It didn't matter. This was for them. For their smiles, their joy. For the moment they'd see that someone cared enough to go the extra mile. Amanda could have her opinions, but tomorrow wasn't about her. It wasn't even about us. It was about the kind of love that endures, the kind my parents had built over 3.5 decades. And I was going to make sure they knew just how much it mattered. The couch was a cruel substitute for a bed. My back ached from the lumpy cushions, and the thin throw blanket offered little comfort against the chill of the night. I stared at the ceiling, the faint glow of the streetlights outside casting long shadows across the room. The house felt impossibly quiet, save for the occasional creak of the walls settling into the night. I tried to focus on the thought that had carried me through this decision, the joy on my parents' faces when they saw the gifts. My mom's laugh, my dad's look of disbelief as he ran his hands over the car. I pictured the pride in their eyes, the way they'd beam in front of everyone, their love shining brighter than the years they'd weathered together. That's what this was for, I told myself. For them. But the memory of Amanda's tear-filled eyes, her sharp words, and the door she slammed in my face wouldn't leave me. As much as I wanted to push the thought away, it lingered. Would she even come tomorrow? Or had this argument driven a wedge too deep to fix? I shifted on the couch, trying to find a position that didn't dig the armrest into my ribs. The answer eluded me. Just like Amanda. Just like the life we'd built that felt suddenly unsteady, as if one wrong move might bring it all crashing down. Somewhere between those thoughts, of my parents, of her, of us, I must have drifted off. When I woke, the sun was already spilling through the blinds, painting the room in pale yellow light. I sat up groggily, rubbing my neck where the couch had left its mark. The clock on the wall read 8 a.m., the day of the anniversary. The house was quiet, unnervingly so. I didn't hear Amanda moving around, no clatter of dishes in the kitchen or running water from the bathroom. I stood and stretched, wincing at the stiffness in my back, before heading to the kitchen to grab something quick for breakfast. Toast, coffee, nothing more. My thoughts weren't on food. My gaze kept drifting to the hallway, to the closed door at the end. Her door. With a sigh, I set down the half-eaten toast and walked toward it. My steps felt heavier with each one, the air thick with the weight of what I had to say. I knocked gently at first, then louder. "Amanda," I called, trying to keep my voice calm. "It's morning. We need to get ready." No answer. I knocked again, harder this time. "Amanda, don't do this." Still nothing. My patience was wearing thin. I pressed my forehead against the door, frustration bubbling up like a storm ready to break. "Are you seriously going to ruin this day? For them? For me? Open the damn door." I banged my fist against it, the sound echoing down the empty hallway. The silence on the other side was deafening, her refusal to acknowledge me a dagger twisting deeper. For a moment, I thought she wouldn't come out at all. That she would stay locked away, and I'd have to explain to everyone why she wasn't there. But then, just as abruptly as I had started knocking, the door opened. Amanda stood there, her face a mask of tired anger. Her hair was a mess, her eyes swollen from the kind of sleep that offers no rest. She didn't say a word. She just walked past me, her steps deliberate, and headed toward the wardrobe. "Are you seriously going to stay mad all day?" I asked, trailing behind her. She didn't respond. Not a glance, not a flicker of acknowledgement. She opened the wardrobe and began pulling out clothes, her movements stiff and mechanical, as though I wasn't even in the room. I stood there, helpless, watching her. "Amanda, I'm serious. If you spoil this day for them, you'll regret it. You know how important this is to me." Her silence was louder than any argument we'd ever had. I could see it in the set of her jaw, the tightness in her shoulders. She was angry, yes, but more than that, she was hurt. And as much as I wanted to push, to make her understand why this day mattered, I knew there was no getting through to her. Not now. Sighing, I turned and left the room. In the bedroom mirror, I caught a glimpse of her as she dressed, her movements slow and deliberate. Her face was a storm cloud, dark and brooding, and I knew she wasn't coming for me. If she was coming at all, it was for the sake of appearances, to avoid the questions that would surely follow her absence. I went to get ready myself, pulling on my best shirt and tie, my mind a whirlwind of emotions. Frustration. Guilt. A pang of doubt that I refused to name. The day was starting, whether we were ready for it or not. But as I glanced down the hallway, catching a glimpse of Amanda in the mirror, her face hard as stone. I couldn't shake the feeling that something had already cracked. And no amount of gifts, no amount of celebration could patch it. The drive to my parents' house was quiet, too quiet. Amanda sat in the back seat, her arms crossed, her face set in that same tight mask she'd worn since this morning. I tried once or twice to say something, to break the ice, but her curt replies killed every attempt. I gave up, focusing instead on the road. We stopped to pick up Adam, her best friend, on the way. He was waiting on the curb, his hands stuffed into the pockets of a sharp blazer that made him look more polished than I'd expected. When he climbed into the car, he flashed me a grin and greeted me warmly before slipping into the back seat right next to Amanda. "Hey, Amanda," he said casually, his tone light. "Looking good today." She turned to him with a faint smile that I hadn't seen all morning. "Hi, Adam," she said, her voice warmer than it had been with me all day. And just like that, they were talking. About nothing important, mutual friends, some movie they'd both seen, but it was effortless. I listened in silence, my grip tightening on the steering wheel. I told myself I wasn't upset. He was her friend. They'd known each other forever. But the knot in my chest told a different story. By the time we arrived at my parents' house, the party was already in full swing. Cars lined the driveway and spilled onto the street, and the sound of loud music and laughter drifted through the open windows. The energy was infectious, a celebration of love and longevity that I was proud to have a hand in creating. My parents came out to greet us, their faces lighting up when they saw me. "Brian," my mom exclaimed, pulling me into a tight hug. "Look at you all dressed up. Happy anniversary," I said, grinning as my dad came over to clap me on the back. "I've got something special for you too." I led them to the car, the red vintage beauty gleaming in the sunlight. My dad's jaw dropped. "You've got to be kidding me," he said, running a hand over the hood. His voice was thick with disbelief and joy. My mom gasped when she saw the scooter, her hands flying to her mouth. "Brian," she said, her eyes brimming with tears. It's too much." "Nothing's too much for the two of you," I replied, feeling a swell of pride. For a moment, the tension with Amanda faded into the background. This was what it was all about. This moment. Their happiness. But then I glanced back and saw Amanda, standing off to the side, her arms crossed again. Her face was like a storm cloud as she looked at the gifts, her lips pressed into a tight line. She didn't say a word to my parents, didn't offer a single smile. I saw my mom glance at her, her brows knitting together in concern. "Is Amanda all right?" she asked quietly. "She's fine," I lied quickly, giving a dismissive wave. "Just had a fight with her mom. You know how it is." My mom nodded, her worry fading. I felt a pang of guilt, but what else could I say? That my wife hated the gifts? That she thought I'd ruined us financially? That she couldn't even muster a polite word from my parents on their big day? This day wasn't about her. Inside, the party was electric. The music was loud, the drinks flowed freely, and everyone seemed to be in high spirits. My parents were basking in the attention, and I couldn't stop smiling. I raised my glass again and again, making toast after toast, each one more heartfelt than the last. But through it all, I couldn't ignore Amanda. She sat in the corner with Adam, her back to the room, her head leaning in close to his as they talked. And talked. And talked. I wasn't the only one who noticed. My mom caught my arm as I passed by with another drink in hand. "What's going on with Amanda?" she asked, her voice low so no one else could hear. "She's been glued to Adam all night. Did something happen?" I forced a smile, shaking my head. "Just that fight with her mom," I said again, hoping it sounded convincing. "She's probably still upset." My mom frowned but didn't press further. I hurried away before she could read me too closely. The night wore on, and I tried to drown my frustration in the party. I laughed with old family friends, shared stories with my dad, and clinked glasses with anyone who raised theirs. But every time I glanced at Amanda, the knot in my chest tightened. When the band started playing a slower tune, I decided to try. I crossed the room to where she was still sitting with Adam. "Come dance with me," I said, holding out my hand. She barely looked at me. "I'm fine," she said flatly. "Come on," I urged, trying to keep my voice light. It's a party. Have some fun. I said no, Brian, she snapped, her eyes cutting to mine for the first time all night. I stood there for a moment, my hands still outstretched, feeling the weight of her rejection settle over me. Fine, I muttered, turning away. I hadn't made it 3 steps before I heard her laugh, light, carefree, the kind of laugh I hadn't heard in months. I turned back and saw her standing with Adam, his hand on hers as he led her to the dance floor. They started moving together, her body swaying easily in time with the music. His hands hovered close to her waist, and she didn't pull away. She smiled at him, a soft, genuine smile that I hadn't seen in what felt like forever. My blood boiled. My fists clenched. Every nerve in my body screamed at me to do something, to say something, to pull her away from him. But I didn't. I stood there, frozen as the music swirled around us. And for the first time that night, I wasn't sure if I could salvage this. She wanted to hurt me. That much was obvious now. Every glance, every word, or lack thereof, cut sharper than I cared to admit. Watching Amanda with Adam on the dance floor, the way she moved so freely, so easily with him, it wasn't just indifference. It was calculated, deliberate. She wanted me to see it, to feel it, and she wanted it to sting. If that's what she wanted, I wouldn't give her the satisfaction of a reaction. I told myself to let it go, to focus on the party, on my parents, on the reason we were here. The night was about them, not her or me. I laughed with guests, shook hands with old friends, and raised another toast to my parents' incredible 35 years together. But every now and then, my eyes would drift back to her and Adam. They weren't dancing anymore. Instead, they stood near the back door, his arm leaning casually against the frame as she laughed at something he said. 30 minutes passed, maybe more, when I noticed the two of them slipping outside. Something tightened in my chest. My resolve to ignore her cracked, and before I knew it, my feet were carrying me after them. I pushed the door open quietly, stepping into the cool night air. The garden was dimly lit by strings of fairy lights that my mom had hung earlier in the week. I stayed back, letting the shadows hide me as I spotted them by the far edge of the yard. Adam had his back to me, but Amanda was facing him, her hands moving animatedly as she spoke. And then I saw it, a cigarette in her hand. She brought it to her lips, inhaling deeply before letting the smoke curl out into the night air. Amanda didn't smoke. She hated smoking. I stepped forward, unable to stop myself. "What are you doing?" My voice cut through the quiet, sharper than I intended. Amanda froze for a moment, her eyes narrowing as she saw me. Then she took another long drag, holding the cigarette delicately between her fingers. "What does it look like I'm doing?" she said, her tone cold and defiant. "You don't smoke," I said, the disbelief in my voice giving way to anger. "Why are you smoking?" She shrugged, blowing out the smoke in a slow, deliberate exhale. "It's none of your business." "None of my business?" I repeated, stepping closer. "You're my wife, Amanda. What the hell is going on with you?" Her expression hardened, the anger simmering beneath her cool demeanor finally breaking through. "What's going on with me? You're the one who made this choice, Brian. You decided to blow through all our savings without even talking to me. So don't stand there and act like you're concerned. Go back inside and have fun with your shiny gifts and your perfect little party." Her words hit like a slap. For a moment I just stood there, staring at her, trying to process what she'd said. I wanted to fire back, to tell her she was being unreasonable, childish even, but I couldn't find the words. "Fine," I said finally, my voice low. "If that's how you feel, then enjoy your cigarette. Whatever this is." I gestured toward Adam, whose expression was unreadable, though he had the decency to avoid my gaze. "But don't expect me to keep ignoring it." Her gaze didn't waver. "I'm not asking you to," she said simply, taking another drag. The pain in my chest twisted, sharp and relentless, but I turned and walked away. Back into the warmth and light of the party, where my parents were still smiling, still glowing with the joy of their anniversary. I focused on them, on the reason we were here. I wasn't going to let her ruin this night, not for them and not for me. For the next half hour, I threw myself into the party. I laughed at my dad's old stories, helped my mom as she fussed over the gifts, and even found myself caught up in the nostalgia of it all. It worked for a while. The warmth of their gratitude, the pride in their eyes, it was everything I'd hoped for when I planned this. But the relief was short-lived. From the corner of my eye, I spotted Amanda and Adam back inside. She was holding a glass now, her laughter loud and careless. Adam stood beside her, matching her drink for drink. It was surreal. Amanda never drank. At most, she'd sip wine at dinner, but tonight she was tossing back shots like she'd done it her whole life. I watched as she leaned against Adam, her cheeks flushed, her laughter a little too loud. She was numbing herself. That much was clear. And even though I told myself to let it go, to focus on the party, I couldn't stop the anger bubbling just beneath the surface. Every glance at her felt like a fresh wound, a reminder of how far apart we'd grown. It wasn't until later, when I was in the study with my parents, that I noticed they were gone. We'd been going through some of their anniversary gifts, laughing over my mom's reaction to a particularly garish face, when I realized the party felt lighter somehow, quieter. I stepped out into the main room, scanning the crowd. They weren't there. The space where Amanda and Adam had been standing was empty. My pulse quickened as my eyes darted around the room, looking for any sign of them. Nothing. The knot in my chest tightened again, and this time, it didn't loosen. The house was too full, too loud, and too bright, yet somehow it felt suffocatingly empty. I moved through the rooms with purpose, my heart pounding in my chest as I searched. Amanda and Adam were nowhere to be seen. Not in the living room, not in the kitchen. I checked the back garden again, the shadowed corners where the smokers gathered, but they weren't there either. The music thumped on, the party oblivious to my growing panic. I asked a few people if they'd seen Amanda or Adam, but their answers were vague shrugs, polite smiles. They were here earlier, someone said. Haven't seen them in a bit. I moved upstairs next, the thudding of the music fading as I climbed. The house was eerily quiet on this level, the buzz of the party replaced by the creaks of old wood and my own shallow breaths. Room by room I searched, guest bedrooms, the study, even the bathroom. Nothing. And then I heard it. Faint voices coming from above, muffled and quiet. The attic. I hesitated at the base of the pull-down ladder. My parents rarely went up there, just a dusty, cluttered space full of forgotten things. Why would anyone be up there? But the voices were unmistakable. Amanda's voice. Adam's. I climbed the ladder slowly, my hand trembling as I reached for the latch. The voices grew clearer as I approached, and then I heard her say it. I hate Brian. He's nothing to me now. He's just a bastard who ruined my life, so I'm letting you do this. The words hit like a slap, leaving me breathless. My mind scrambled to make sense of them, but nothing clicked. Letting him do what? I pushed the door open with more force than I intended, the creak of the hinges splitting the silence like a scream. The scene in front of me was a nightmare brought to life. Amanda was lying on the old wooden table. Adam stood in front of her, his face pale, his body frozen in place as the door swung wide. The air was heavy, thick with the smell of dust and the intimacy they'd shared. For a moment, none of us moved. Time seemed to hang in the stale air of the attic, suspended by shock and disbelief. And then I found my voice. What the hell are you doing? I roared, my voice cracking with the weight of my anger. Adam stumbled back, fumbling to cover himself. His face was a mess of shame and fear, but Amanda didn't even flinch. She didn't bother to adjust her dress, didn't sit up or try to explain. She just lay there, her eyes locking onto mine with a look that was both defiant and empty. Adam, don't stop, she said, her voice cold, detached. Let him scream all he wants. Her words cut through me, sharper than any knife. I felt something inside me snap, a primal surge of rage and betrayal surging to the surface. I stepped forward, my fists clenched, but before I could reach Adam, Amanda spoke again. How dare you, she spat, her voice rising as she sat up. How dare you act like the victim here, Brian? You think you're so noble, so perfect. Spending all our money on this damn party, pretending it's for your parents, but it's not. It's for you. Because you're nothing without them. A mama's boy. A daddy's boy. That's all you are. I staggered back, her words hitting me like blows. You're blaming me? After this? After, I gestured wildly at the scene before me. You've lost your mind. She laughed bitterly, sliding off the table with a careless grace that made my blood boil. You don't even see it, do you? You've been married to them, Brian. Not me. Everything is about them. Their anniversary. Their happiness. Their everything. When was the last time you gave a damn about me? About us? Before I could respond, a quiet, heart-wrenching sound came from behind me. I turned and saw my mother standing on the attic ladder, her face pale and streaked with tears. She must have followed me, and now she was standing there, her hands trembling as she clutched the railing. Mom, I whispered, my voice cracking. Her sobs cut me off. She didn't say a word, just turned and climbed back down, her body shaking with every step. I felt like the air had been sucked out of the room. The anger that had fueled me moments ago evaporated, leaving only shame and a hollow, gnawing ache. I turned back to Amanda, but she wouldn't even look at me now. Adam stood frozen, as if moving would make things worse. Without another word, I turned and followed my mother. The sound of my footsteps on the stairs seemed deafening in the quiet house. I reached the bottom just as my mother stepped into the kitchen, her hand covering her mouth as she tried to stifle her sobs. I went after her, reaching out to steady her as she wavered. Mom, I'm sorry, I said, my voice trembling. I'm so sorry. You weren't supposed to see that. None of this was supposed to. She turned to me, her tear-streaked face filled with a pain I'd never seen before. Brian, she whispered, her voice broken. What has happened to you? To your marriage? To everything? I had no answer. None that mattered. She shook her head, wiping at her tears, and I could see the weight of the night crushing her. I couldn't bear it. Couldn't stand the thought of her carrying this pain, this shame, on what was supposed to be her day. I turned and bolted for the front door. The cold night air hit me like a slap, but I didn't stop. I climbed into my dad's car, gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. The image of Amanda and Adam burned behind my eyes, her words echoing in my head. I started the engine, the rumble drowning out the noise in my mind. For a moment I just sat there, staring out into the dark, trying to breathe, trying to think, trying to decide what came next. But the only thing I knew for certain was that I couldn't go back inside. I drove through the night, tears blurring my vision. Amanda's words echoed in my head, cutting deeper with every mile. She had ruined everything. The party, my family's happiness, and whatever was left of us. By the time I reached home, I was shaking. I packed my things in a frenzy, tossing her belongings around the room like garbage. The photos came off the walls next, their frames shattering against the floor. I couldn't stay here. I couldn't breathe. Grabbing the suitcase, I left without a second thought. My dad's car was still warm from the drive, but it didn't feel like mine to use. His text came as I sped away, "Bring back the car. We need to talk." I ignored it. How could I face him after what happened? After what they saw? I ended up at my grandfather's house, his quiet porch a refuge from the storm of my life. He didn't ask questions, just pointed me to the spare room. I stayed. One day turned into weeks, then months. For 3 months, I worked around his house, trying to bury my shame in chores and silence. I thought about returning to the city, to my parents, but the memory of my mother's tears and Amanda's betrayal kept me rooted. I wasn't ready to face them. Maybe I never would be. Today is November 14th. I've been writing this for several days. It's hard for me to write this, and I realized that I was a complete fool. My wife always said that I was doing everything wrong now. I'm very sorry that I didn't give her so much time. Everything could have changed if I hadn't bought that damn car and scooter. I've been trying to ask her for forgiveness for several days now, but she doesn't pick up the phone. I'm very ashamed of her.